Hi and welcome everybody. I am with Mr. Ranjeev Dubey. This is, sir, it's an absolute privilege to finally meet you in person because I've been a big fan since 2014, since I stumbled across this book of yours, The Bullshit Quotient. And what happened was, I think I was just scrolling on the internet, reading articles, 1 year of practice under my belt, and like the usual lawyer running around, scrambling about, trying to get a sense of things in his life. I read The Bullshit Quotient. It was amazing because I'd read a bunch of other books as well, and people talk about how a lawyer, like a lawyer writes, this lawyer's book was amazing. And when I read that book, I'm not able to go past, say, maybe 15 or 20 pages. And because it's always a nightmare, and I'm sure you can relate to that as well. You try to pick up any of these so-called Indian classics, and it looks like a brief prepared by a lawyer for one of his clients.
Like an advertising campaign, actually.
I guess, yes, that would be the best way to put it. So when I read The Bullshit Quotient, it literally blew my mind because I said, this is amazing. I looked up the guy, and I started reading a bunch of your articles. So a couple of months later, then of course, I was following you. So I think you posted somewhere on social media that your new book, Legal Confidential, is out. So of course I had to have it. The moment it was out, I think within the first week or 10 days, I bought the book. And the raw way that you kind of wrote about your entire professional journey for the first few decades of your career was something that I could relate to. And on a deeper level, I was astounded at the kind of the rawness of what someone can talk about, because this is the kind of stuff that I've always wanted to talk about, but you put it out there without any fear, without any without holding yourself back in any way whatsoever. And that kind of has been, since the past 6 years, it has been a benchmark for me, a benchmark of how can I be a little more free as a lawyer? How can I live my life on my own terms as a lawyer? Something which I personally have struggled with quite a bit. I'm extremely grateful to you, Ranjeev sir, for agreeing to do this interview. And for all those people who have read the book, people who know me, and they say, what law book should I read? I say, read this book. Read Legal Confidential to understand the practice of law, and then read The Bullshit Quotient to understand the legal system and the governance of the country and how you can kind of waddle around it as well.
Thank you.
I'm really grateful for the opportunity, sir. I'm
you.
hoping that through this interview we can have many more people pick up these two books, read them, and inculcate in them the personality that is Ranjeev Dubey. I am, and I remember, I emailed you a couple of months after reading Legal Confidential. I emailed your official email ID. I did not know who will reply to that, but you were kind enough to yourself reply with a couple of kind words of encouragement, and I've been really grateful, and I'm even more grateful for the fact that you replied recently. In touch, we had a good amount of conversation, and then I land up over here. Extremely grateful for this, sir. I have these questions for you that I prepared, sir, and hopefully we'll have we'll have the raw personality that is Ranjeev Dubey come across here as well, like always. So, the first question. We know you're from a privileged background. Why did you then choose to struggle in the trial courts for 12 years?
My father was a significant businessman and had vast landed estates, so there was a lifestyle associated with it. In walking away from that, and I'm the only son, in walking away from that privilege, already a kind of embedded decision existed in my mind that I would do it my way and struggle if I needed to. So there was no, I didn't think that going to the trial, I didn't think that going to the trial court was particularly onerous for me. Why the trial court at all was because of an old uncle. He was as blunt with me as I am generally with people. He told me, look, you want to learn law, the only place you can learn law is in a trial court. Everything else is just bits and pieces and elements. And you need to understand the big picture. Plus, You want to make it on your own, you don't want daddy's money, this is the only place where you'll make a small living to begin with. Go there, pay your dues, get your power, learn, and you'll be a lawyer yet. Personally, I don't rate your chances. You're just a spoiled rich kid. So I said, okay, well, we'll see about that. So I went to the trial court, and damn, it was a shock, yeah. It's a brutal place, but it is what it is. I survived.
You've highlighted the struggles of, and in such a profound way. It's one thing to talk about the figures, the statistics when you've had a Holocaust. It's a completely different feeling altogether to actually talk about what happened in concentration camp, where you actually went through those struggles yourself. And that is precisely how you've put it in the book, sir. This kind of unabashed, as you said, blunt thing is something which you never ever see. You hear all of those things, and this, I think, is of course, it is not, I wouldn't say it is, this book is inspiring, but I think more than that, it is it's a reality. One, it's a reality check, and second, at the end of the day, it kind of still gives you legal confidential, at least it gives you a very, very fair warning, and also a glimpse into the kind of rewards that you can get if you do go for this career.
Well, I hope it's a song of hope. I mean, in the sense that in the end, things worked out. And I hope I communicate that if you hang in there and you pay your dues, it'll work out in the end. I mean, that was more or less the plan. The only thing is, I wasn't willing to write a book which said that, it's all chocolate icing and cakes and pastries all the way and life is going to be beautiful and every day it'll get better and better and better. No, it doesn't.
Right.
You have to hang in there, and then it works out in the end, and there's always hope. And sometimes terrifying adversity also leads to great triumph. But how will you find out till you've been there?
Yeah. Right. We know that you've had a very, very long, detailed, of course, struggle at the trial courts. Do you ever regret becoming an original side lawyer?
No. See, in the end, it all came together. I mean, okay, after 12 years, I joined a law firm. And all those boys were super brats. They were coming from Jimmy Dada Chanchi. The biggest law firm of its time. They had about 70% of all filing in the Supreme Court of SLPs. They didn't know anything about law. I mean, as it's practiced, sure, they knew the legal principles. But when it came to filing a Fard Talwana, which I don't know if you guys know about it, that's Urdu for process fee.
Right.
How do you actually go and physically file it? What do you fill in those forms? I knew how to do it because I couldn't afford a court clerk.
Right.
So at a basic level, I knew practice. I knew which guy to talk to, the Nazir, if I wanted to execute a decree.
Right.
Yeah. So in the end, all those elements, they formed a complete lawyer, but everybody else was incomplete. They needed somebody else to fix it for them.
Right.
And without a court clerk and a this and a that and a that and an accountant, I used to write my own bills. They didn't know how to invoice.
Right.
I could never afford a steno. I had to do my own invoicing. So yeah, I know there's nothing to regret. On the contrary, the part that's worrisome is that, in the beginning, if you go to the trial court and slave, your friends who are from a similar privileged background, they've been to MBA. They'll start their careers with cars and houses and this and that. You're left behind and you can't afford to really entertain them, but they can afford to entertain you.
Right.
And so there's a strong sense that, am I getting this wrong?
Right.
But in the end, you have to believe that you're the person you are and you read yourself right and you made the right choice based not on some objective criteria of what a career should be, but on what's appropriate to you and your cluster of needs and aptitudes. And if you recognize that, look, I'm the kind of guy who needs to become a lawyer, there's no self-doubt.
Right.
Yeah. I couldn't have been anyone else.
Did you have that thing in you when you started out that I need to be a lawyer, that I need to do this?
It was a process of elimination. I knew what I was not going to be.
Right.
I had the option. I wrote an exam for MBA and I got in. It wasn't the best MBA because most of the time I was writing these exams half-heartedly. I got my letter and then I thought about it and I said, no. My father was from a very small town, very respectable person. He said, you have to join government, write an IS exam or something. What are they called? UPSC or something.
Right.
And I said, stand every morning and answer politicians? You're kidding me. I don't take instructions very well. A
Right.
person like me can never have a job. I'm unemployable.
Right.
And the years I spent in a law firm, I gave my seniors a lot of grief. I mean, I don't know if that comes through in the book. I don't think I was a nice guy to employ.
I think to a good extent it did. But yet I could see the struggle between your desire to make a living and also kind of do your own thing and put across your views as well. So that was a
Yeah.
constant struggle that I could see, throughout the book. I did I you know I was so sad when you left the book at such a cliffhanger. That was something which for me was because you talked about, of course, how the whole thing was like for you. But one thing that I would have loved to, and I'm sure I'm looking forward to in maybe the next couple of years, to still, see how it was for Ranjeev after he started his own thing. That is one thing that, in fact, I kind of turned around the pages. I thought, maybe I have a book which does not have the, the like some pages missing or something, because that was something that, of course, a cliffhanger makes a great book by, as well. But that was something that really kind of, for me was, and that's why I reached out to you as well, and I said, is anything, when do we have that? And of course, you said that that's not in the works for the next couple of years at least.
There is no sequel planned, but a
Right.
sequel may happen.
Right.
Yeah. I left the book where I shut a door. I did add some words in the end of to suggest something. I mean, the book basically says I'm walking away from a law firm.
Right.
And I've given my reasons why.
Right.
And I think that's a parable there somewhere where I'm saying that if you want truly to be your own man, then you have to create the world in which you wish to live. Otherwise, you are always answerable to rules other people make. Now, that's only, you can only go so far with that, but okay, to the extent you can, you should. But then life offers you brutal choices, and you have to decide which compromises you're going to accept. And those lawyers gave me those choices.
Right.
And it didn't matter what choices I made. What mattered was that I understood that day that I will have to choose between various compromises, none of which are optimal. And that's where the book ends, because that was my realization at that point in time. And you're not the only one. That book was widely reviewed, Legal Confidential. Everybody. It comes down to two or three choices. People who are irritated.
Right.
What is this nonsense? You're trying to sell a second book? Well, at some point I will, yeah. And people who think I'm just trying to make another lousy buck or something, I mean, it is dissatisfactory. I thought I'd done well, but a lot of people are dissatisfied with the outcome. Were you?
The only dissatisfaction was that I wanted a little more. The greedy me wanted a little more. I could not even possibly think about this aspect. I mean, it's a few lousy bucks. I could, you write 100 of them. I'll buy 100 copies and I'll gift them out.
Thank you.
That's the kind of love that I have for your work, sir.
Thank you.
But the only thing was, like that whole that adventure of the hero of the movie starting out on a ship and going on to his adventures. That is what the perhaps the Bollywood lover in me wanted, and that is the only disappointment. But then you can't have everything in the world, right? You get whatever you can. Another question was there, sir, which really was a big surprise. Of course, you've kind of detailed about how in the book about how the transition happened, but I think a little less of the why of after practicing for 12 years, after developing a decent little base for yourself, after the whole panel situation. For those of you who don't know, panels in this country are a very, very nice little lucrative way to kind of have a sustainable practice going on. Would you agree, sir?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, and for to that extent, if you have a panel, works very, very nicely for you. I know a lot of people who might not be very competent yet they survive, and not just survive but thrive.
He's talking about people like me.
Absolutely not, sir. You
I'm
are
just kidding you.
you. I'm sure. There's no doubt the kind of the grasp that you have over legal concepts, and that too the way you simplify everything. I must mention the Buffalo jurisprudence. Now that is something that
Oh, you
I
like that?
read, it and it resonated with me so much that on a lot of occasions when clients don't understand dispute resolution processes and they have these doubts about what will happen about this or what will happen about that, I literally tell them that there is this Buffalo jurisprudence which I read 6-7 years ago, right? Around the time that I read the bullshit quotient, and yet I remember I have not read that thing again, and yet I remember the principle. जिसने भैंस पकड़ ली, he is the one who wins. उसके बाद बाकी कुछ भी करते रहो, at the end of the day, the one with the buffalo wins, and that is what the Buffalo jurisprudence is. So the kind of grasp that you have in the way you simplify complex legal situations, of course you take out a lot of the nonsense that lawyers love to kind of delve deep into, but to simplify it for the masses is one skill that actually I feel what advocacy is at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And if you do a fantastic job of that, I have no doubt when I have any corporate work coming my way, it'll be N South law that I will be coming to without a doubt.
Thank you. Very kind. Very kind.
Yes, sir. Moving on. So the question was, why did you leave the practice of litigation running around in the courts and then switch to a law firm model and more on the corporate side of work?
Two answers. Answer number one, law practice runs in silos. Individuals service individuals and organizations service organizations. At some point I felt that as an individual I was simply not capable of pitching to the large organizations. They didn't think I had the depth of resource. So the problem existed, and then we were talking about organizing ourselves into something bigger. But then Narasimha Rao happened. Your generation may never understand what Narasimha Rao did for people like us. I mean, he was airbrushed out of Indian history for reasons that are mainly political. But he brought in a new culture, and all the foreigners came in droves. And before I knew it, the legal world had completely transformed. And the law firms were organizing so fast, I joined one. And suddenly I had access to all these foreign clients. And then the question was, where do you want to practice law and what kind of law you want to practice? And you could always keep doing the Tisudari thing. Or you could say, okay, ho gaya now, 12 years is long enough, let's do something else now.
Right.
And so that's how it went, basically.
In fact, sir, you saying that we might not know what Narasimha Rao did for us, I actually know what he did only because of reading your materials. Of course, we all understand about whatever happened around the early 1990s, but the kind of glimpse that you gave into the literal evil of the license Raj is only again something that you will understand only if you've actually, if you actually pick up the book, The Bullshit Quotient, and you actually see what all is written over there. It just opens up your mind to so much that, I for one definitely hate paying taxes. I definitely still think that the bureaucracy is complete shambles in this country. Governance could be far better. But then when I read or when I remember Ranjeev Dubey's words, then I think about how far we've come along and how much more better we still are than the days of the past. Moving on, sir. You've been very candid about several instances in your career where your mistake affected your client. A lot of lawyers, including me, suffer constant anxiety over the thought of losing the case and also of the guilt of looking back on what I could have done differently. How did you deal with this guilt as an individual practicing lawyer back in the day?
Not very well, I think. I had as much guilt as the next man. I tried to live on the strength of my guilt. But it's nonsense. It's sexy to say, I have no regrets in life. It sounds really cool, but it's nonsense. The truth is, we all have much to regret, and I have my share of them. What I tried to do was never make the same mistake twice. Actually, that sounds like Vito Corleone in The Godfather. He said the same thing.
Okay.
Just try to make different mistakes every time. Also, as you get older and you get wiser and you get smarter, you make fewer mistakes.
Right.
And eventually I got to a point where I would not make any mistakes. Relatively speaking.
Sure.
And I had this theory that by the time I wrote my first book, now out of print, coming out next month, called Winning Legal Wars, my argument was that you never lose a case. You either win or you stalemate it. You just have, you need never lose a case.
Right.
Over the next 20 years, yeah, there have been a few cases lost, but very few. So mistakes is something you get over. It's only old memories you carry. Yeah.
Right. So as a young lawyer, I think the only thing I need to wait for is to
Become
kind
a
of-
not young lawyer.
I mean, I'd like to think that's the kind of conversation I was having with somebody else, and I told the person, as a young lawyer, I'd like to think that I'm doing decently well for myself, and I have my own clients, and I'm doing all of the, and the lawyer, this American attorney says, why do you consider yourself a young lawyer? You have almost 8 years of experience under you. Why do you call yourself young? And said, that's because I hang out with old people all the time who keep reminding me how young I am. And so that's and that's a very valid point that you pointed out, sir. Sir, as a young lawyer, Legal Confidential reveals that you are fairly idealistic. You've talked about how the judiciary has its hand tied, restricted only to enforcing and interpreting the will of the 500 lawmakers. Consequently, the lawyers and the litigants are tied, observing obedience to the justice system. Between self-serving actions of all the parties involved, how does one manage to preserve their ideals in the system?
Ideals in their system. No, you don't. You do not preserve your ideals in the system. What you try to do is make boundaries. Everybody makes compromises. Everybody accepts that the world is what it is. I think it was V.S. Naipaul who said that. The world is what it is. I forget some of the words. That those who don't deal with this reality have no place in it. You can walk away from the world. There's always a cave somewhere waiting for you, long lease. But if you come into a football field, you have to be ready to kick shins.
Right.
It's fundamental. So get out there, and do what must be done. But there are things that you are in conflict with from a purely philosophical standpoint. How do you get past that? And the answer is simple. You make your boundaries. This stuff I won't do. I've never corrupted a judge. I don't need to. I don't need to find out if somebody is corrupt because there's always an appeal court.
Right.
But having said that, the real brutal truth is that if somebody came to me and said, that lawyer can get you an order, I think I'd hire him.
Right.
So I'm not doing the job, but am I not doing the job? Of course, somewhere I'm making a compromise, but the boundaries, I'm not handing out cash. That
Right.
says nothing about whether I think judges are corruptible. I mean, in Indian society, you don't have to take cash to give an order.
Right.
Sometimes you can be so under obligation that you'd give an order just like that to, waive off some historical debt.
Right.
Yeah.
As someone who has also seen his fair share of corruption in the system, I can vouch for, and I can understand what exactly you're talking about. And then again, this resistance comes inside of me to, which says, don't talk about this in a public forum. You don't know what kind of backlash there might be. You don't know what kind of, repercussion might there be. And that is why I treat you as an inspiration, sir, because you're able to kind of at least, put it out there, put out the fact that, yes, there is, stuff like that happens.
There's a YouTube video. This is a Goa Chamber of Commerce, nearly I remember, where I went and lambasted the judicial system, and that's all we've got. So if it doesn't survive in the way that I've known it, we've got nothing. It's all black.
Right.
So it's at its core. I mean, I'm desperate that we have a good judicial system, but I criticized it, and Parikar was sitting there. He was chief minister at the time. He passed away. Wonderful man. And he said, what if I accuse you of contempt of court? And I said, yeah, but contempt of which court?
Right.
And he said, you're contempt of all courts. I said, yeah, but look at the law of defamation. If I say all politicians are corrupt, you can't sue me. On the other hand, if I say Parikar is... he laughed his head off, yeah.
Right.
So if you're generic, you're not guilty of contempt.
Right. That's I think that's a lesson that I'll also kind of try to inculcate.
Speak your mind. Life is short, yeah.
Right, sir. Did you at any point of time think of just leaving the profession behind? The stress, all of this to cope up with the entire time? Did any thought come, let's just leave this?
There's no need. This profession is the widest. I mean, if you ask me the other question, why did I choose to be a lawyer? My answer would be the same. What is it you can't do as a lawyer Look around you. There are lawyers who start at 6 in the morning, and they're working till midnight, day after day, till they grow old, and they have samadhi, and they go straight from their office to the Shamshan Ghat,
Right.
and that's all they know. And that's one kind of lawyer, the kind of lawyer you admire as a lawyer. But he has no life.
Right.
Then there are lawyers who only attend funerals because if you're if you're with somebody in their times of trouble, they are your real friends, and you should get business out of it. So they're never in office. They're at Nigambodh Ghat or something.
Right.
All the time. The others who are PR people, they stand in parties wearing Gucci shoes and whatever else, and smoking exotic Havana cigars, and that's all their business is. And when it comes to the work, they've got some guy in the back doing it for them. That's a
Right.
lawyer too.
Right.
What did I do? I mean, I had a different work-life balance. I'm interested in the wilderness. I spent a lot of time there. I'm interested in writing. I did a lot of writing. I'm interested in audio visual. I did my photos were sold professionally all over the place in the days when people actually paid for pictures.
Right.
So there's a bunch of stuff I've done apart from off-roading, and I've also built miniature models. I didn't have to quit. I just had to reallocate my time. Less practice of law, more of something else. Why quit?
Right.
And whatever no one here gets out alive. Okay, you get one shot on life. If you build up some capital, why would you throw it away? You would invest it, maybe put it in a bank, do
Right.
something else, and come back and keep using the proceeds of that capital later. Nah.
Right.
What did Mr. Jetli do? He more or less quit law practice,
Right.
became a minister. The government changed. He came right back.
Right.
Well, I'm
And
not
that's a
smarter
common-
than him. Huh?
That's a common theme of all lawyer turned politicians. Right.
You don't quit. No.
Right, sir. If you were a young lawyer today and had to choose an area of law to practice, what would you personally choose to do?
The same. I still believe that if you don't know original court trial practice, and I mean no disrespect to you, you are not a lawyer. You're just somebody in fancy dress. Go out there, cross-examine a witness, break him apart. If you succeed, I'll call you a lawyer. It's very simple.
Right.
All the rest is stories. All the dancing is something you can do in Bollywood.
Right, sir.
Yeah.
And again, would you start off in a chamber or in a firm? What would your career progression look like if you were starting over?
This is really difficult for me. Youngsters ask me this question all the time. What are the issues? If you join a law firm, you'll get access to important clients. The stuff they do will be reported in newspapers. You'll have a lot of high self-esteem. You'll be paid very well. You will be the 18th lawyer working on that brief.
Right.
And you will retire happy. You'll always have money. Unless you're so stupid that 5 to 7 years after you started, your firm pushes you out because you're not partner material.
Right.
On the other hand, if you're an individual lawyer going to the trial courts and learning, you're going to be doing insignificant cases for years and years and years together with people whose minds are really small, but more than their minds being small, they're desperate because they're on the margins of society. Some of that frustration wipes out on you, and then you absorb it and you make it yours. So there's a debilitating process. It's soul destroying. But on the other side of that, you have domain expertise.
Right.
What would I pick as the one thing that I would pursue if I wanted to make a career out of anything? And the answer is domain expertise. Nothing else matters. If you know your job, the rest comes.
Right. Sir, what tests do you use to determine if at any stage of life you're on the right track? What questions should a young lawyer ask when reviewing his or her progress?
Learning curve, exposure, 1 learning curve, 2 exposure, and 3 whether you are continuing to remain focused on your goals. So learning curve is, am I continuing to learn at a certain minimal rate? You'll have good years and bad years. You can always not learn at the same rate. But if you stop learning, it's time to reconsider your position.
Right.
And of course, you have a long-term career plan. If you're heading in that direction, that's good enough for you. That's fine.
What is it like dealing with young lawyers today, and what are the differences that you see between the young Ranjeev and the and the young lawyers of today?
You know, I'm always wary of Hamare Zamane Mein stories.
Right.
It just sounds so completely senile. Um, we lived in a very small world. I mean, you know, mass communication was limited to 4 newspapers owned by some banias. We didn't truly have access the way your generation does. So, in many ways, you're much smarter. But the problem is, you guys are still so entitled. You think the world owes you a favor. Nobody owes you anything. In my world, people had nothing. I'm from a very privileged background. Did I have air conditioning at home? No, don't be silly. Nobody had air conditioning in Jammu when I was a little boy. My father was rich, very rich, because he owned a small Fiat car.
Right.
Okay, today if my son has to own a small Fiat car, he'll be embarrassed. Maruti 800 is where you enter the market.
Right.
That was the top end at the time. So, your paradigms are different. You're restless. You think that you don't have a sense of insecurity in the way we did. Your insecurity is all about how many cars you'll own. It isn't about whether you'll ever own a bicycle.
Right.
And so you test yourself differently, which makes you restless. You don't have any patience. But on the other hand, the world is your oyster. The amount of confidence you people have, the way you are able to do things, our generation couldn't. We were in a trap. And we were so lacking in self-esteem. Because all around us, there was nothing. I mean, you know, the budget would come out every February 28th. And the finance minister would get up and announce that the price of toothpaste is up 3 paise. And that was something you did in the Lok Sabha. You told the world, I'd say toothpaste will cost 3 paisa more. Now, your world is not like that at all.
Right.
So, there is no point of comparison. We are different species, different animals.
Right.
Yeah.
Self-esteem higher, but because of that, entitlement goes through the roof as well.
Terrifying entitlement. Terrifying. You want air conditioners in summer and heaters in winter. Can you believe this? You can't live in an environment. I mean, anybody who lives in India, who's born in India and is an Indian but can't stand India's heat, really shouldn't be here, right?
Right.
I wore a black coat in Tisazari for 12 years and practiced law. It was okay. It could have been better. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Life can always be better.
I remember reading in Legal Confidential about how you would wear your court attire, then you would, and your love affair with your two-wheeler. So, you know, how you would,
the bike.
yes, you would go and you'd have water splashing on you, and then you would, you know, show up in court and then go about your day and then head back. And as a lawyer, as especially, you know, this generation, I've heard so many stories, and there's always this common theme of but you know, whenever you know, I hear these stories, it's never ever, you know, there's no sense of sorrow in it. There's always a sense of pride, which I think we never have. Like, even if we have our struggles, and we'll talk about our struggles, I feel that as a you know, as a part of this generation, we'll always talk about our struggles with a sense of sorrow, as a sense of, yeah, we don't deserve this, or, you know, this is not something that we should be kind of enduring. But whenever I hear about these stories, it's always a sense of pride. I remember a lawyer telling me that, you know, I used to have only enough money so that I could either take the bus back home, or I could have a small, and then I'd sleep on an empty stomach. Or I would eat a light dinner, maybe like some vada pav or something, and then I have to walk back because I would not have any money to take the bus back home.
Yeah.
And he said it with such a matter of fact, it's almost like a pride kind of a way, which you know, and it did not even kind of give that feel of hamare zamane mein. It was a very, very matter of fact kind of a thing, that is where I started, this is where I am now, one of the top arguing counsels in the Supreme Court. And that is, of course, you know, you've written it in much greater detail about the kind of the struggle that you've had, and, you know, all your fellow lawyers had at that point of time. But this is some good food for thought. The kind of privileges we have, and what we have to, the kind of demons that we have to deal with. Sir, would you advise a young man to become a lawyer today? If so, and if not, you know, then why not?
It isn't about what you do, it's about who you are. I think the searching question you must ask yourself is what kind of person I am and what kind of life would work out. Where would I maximize my potential with the cluster of aptitudes I bring to the table? It's about self awareness. There's some kinds of people who are best off being lawyers, and there's some kind of people who are best off doing somebody's job. Of course, now it's possible to both be a lawyer and do somebody's job, but
Right.
that's a different conversation. So I would, anybody who walks in and says, should I be a lawyer? I would say, well, the first thing a lawyer needs to be is a thinking person. You know, if you don't enjoy the process of thinking, you'll never make a great lawyer. And two, lawyers are always extremely disciplined about their work. If you don't have this quest for excellence and this ability to sit, you know, on your butt in a chair hour after hour, poring over the case law and trying to understand where you can find room in between the lines to get your, let's say, client off the hook, you're not going there, buddy. Don't waste your time, you know. Probably my analysis is a little more rigorous than necessary, and I freely admit to my overstatement, but that's a benchmark you may place on yourself and then see if you can manage with lesser.
Right.
And if you are that kind of person who's maverick, who does his own thing, who doesn't like to take orders, who likes to work hard and who likes to get into things, read up papers, you know, all of that, you'll make a great lawyer. Will you make a great marketing personality, which is a whole different skill? Huh?
Sure.
No, you won't. You'll have to learn that later. Of course, sometimes you get away never learning it. You're so good that you don't need to do any marketing. That's rare these days. So the long answer, the short summary of the long answer to the short question you asked was, it's about who you are. It isn't about what you're going to do next.
Right. I was about to ask you what attributes should a young person have to want to be a lawyer, and what personality traits or interests makes a young person particularly suited to become a lawyer. I think you've answered that question in part.
Half.
But yes, perhaps, you know, if you could kind of delve a little deeper into the kind of attributes, the personality.
The problem is the legal profession requires you to be a very contradictory personality. And this is really its greatest challenge. Ultimately, law is about, let's say on the litigation side, convincing a judge to give you what you want for reasons that he thinks are good. What does that make you? That makes you a salesman. You're a salesman of stories. You
Right.
make up a story. A client comes to you and says he has a grievance. You make a nice story out of it and you sell it to the judge and he buys it and he gives you your judgment.
Right.
You're a salesman. Okay? But you need to know a lot of law. You need to study your butt off. That makes you an intellectual. You're a professor.
Right.
And I could keep developing these trains of thought in the different elements of the profession. And what you will end up with is you're a superb jack of all trades. And if you're not getting there.
Right.
Does it answer your question?
It does, but I would love, you know, some more thoughts of yours on this, because I have always, you know, felt this as more of a thought floating around in my head, but nothing which I could kind of put in words to be able to discuss it with anybody else. The thought process that you rightly said, on one hand you've got the skill of, you know, being a salesman to the court, and on the other hand being that intellect, that at least that, you know, the skill set of being that intellectual who has to then, you know, immerse himself in the case law, in the jurisprudence, and then, you know, pick out the relevant material. Of course, many would argue that they kind of go hand in hand, but I see that, you know, and I think you've kind of pointed towards that direction, that these are contradicting skill sets, and to find a resolution in between is something that, you know, of course we all need to kind of try, and as you said, be a jack of all trades. Another aspect which comes into the picture, which you did say was, that's a conversation for another time, but I would love to kind of have that conversation here as well, is being the salesperson to get the client, and, you know, perhaps also going a little into convincing the perhaps individual from your starting out days when you would have clients walking into your chamber, and then convincing perhaps a bigger client, as you mentioned earlier, organization pitching to an organization. Could you perhaps talk a little about that as well?
I'd like to, you can talk about this till the cows come home. I'd like to give a short answer if I possibly can. My senior when I joined the law firm, a truly brilliant, gifted lawyer whose interests went far beyond law, and therefore there was only so much he did, and then he wanted to do other things. I talked about him a little in my book. He taught me a very great deal, and one of the things he said was that, look, at the end of the day, what are you looking for? Self-esteem, security, money, is it? And at that time I had little children, as I've talked about, and I wanted to pay their bills, and I was having a lot of trouble paying their bills. And he said, Ranjeev, you'll never make money chasing money. It's a fallacy. You have to make money chase you. Try to become the kind of person that money attracts, and then it'll come looking for you. And the answer I came up with for myself was only domain expertise. But with it also goes a certain kind of personality. You have to acquire a certain kind of substantial weight to your personality, which makes other people believe that they are safe in your hands.
Right.
You may not know all the law. In fact, I would very much doubt that I know all that much law. But I know where to find it. I know where to find the people
Right.
who would brief me and tell me this is what it is.
Right.
And then I'd ask 4 or 5 intelligent questions and come to a conclusion. But over a period of time, I was able to become that person who doesn't have trouble making a living simply because his judgment is reliable and people trust it. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does.
Mhm.
And in fact, I can relate to it quite a bit as well, because ever since I have gone independent, I have always wondered about what was there in my starting out years, where I would have prospective clients approaching me. There'd be relatives, there would be friends, there would be friends of friends and friends of relatives. I would never be able to close a client, right? They'd all come, they'd say, oh, such a good boy, he does his research, he gives us the answers that we need, he tells us exactly, what we should be doing and how we should be going about it. Great job. And then they would go back and hire some two-bit idiot who would know perhaps half the law than I do, who would have his hands full, of course, which is another, huge, used to be a huge grouse for me. This man has his hands so full, he barely dedicates any time to his clients. He knows half the law than me. He has no time. Yet these people go to him. And then I realized, several years down the line when I went independent, that my understanding of the law and my ability to be able to spend time, several hours, several days and weeks on a research proposition, that has gone down. So I'm able to spend less time on the client's work. But yet, as you said, now I'm kind of able to put a this thing, that put my finger on this, that it is because the client feels safe in my hands. Even when I tell the client that I've not done anything like this ever before, but I will look up the law, I will take care of it, whatever needs to be done, I will take care of it, and you are in safe hands. Just by saying this, but I think of course, it's not the sentence that matters, it's the as you said, the weight of the personality behind the person who is saying that ultimately matters.
Yeah.
So when I reached out to you around 5 years ago, when I read Legal Confidential, and then I read online that Mr. Dubey had also written this book called Winning Legal Wars. Now, of course, as a lawyer, to read the title Winning Legal Wars itself was so enticing, especially after having read Legal Confidential. And this is the email that I remember writing out to your email ID, to the official email ID of N South Law, which was that I love Ranjeev sir's work. I have read both the books. I'd love to read a copy of Winning Legal Wars, but I cannot find it anywhere. And therefore, I'd love to even pay for a hard copy, collect it from the office, whatever is possible. I'd like to have a copy. And then I got something absolutely unheard of ever, at least by me, a reply from Ranjeev sir saying that he thought that the book has kind of needs to be updated, and that is why he purchased back the rights of the book and got it out of circulation so that he can update it, and then he will go ahead and publish it and on a future date. And so I, couldn't do anything about it. But 6 years later, when I again emailed sir asking for an interview, sir was, and I told him that I did all of this 5 6 years ago. Sir was kind enough to inform me that winning legal wars is just around the corner. And I had a little bit of a sneak peek at it as well. I can tell you that mind blown. I knew that this book is going to be better than Bullshit Quotient and Legal Confidential. For the people who are going to be watching this video, who I'm sure will devour Bullshit Quotient and Legal Confidential, and who will then also send you emails requesting you for Winning Legal Wars to be published as soon as possible. Could we have a little bit of an insight into what is Winning Legal Wars? What was the thought process about, behind writing the book, and uh, what do you wish the reader to understand or to take out of the book when they read the book?
I wrote it in 2003. How old was I at the time? Early 40s? And that's a time when you finally figured out at least the basics of your game and what the legal profession is about. And I thought I had something to say. And I said, we are in a system. The system has the following properties. This is how it functions. If you understand how it functions, you can get the best out of it. It's like a car. If you understand the capability of the car, you can do the best with it that the car is capable of giving you. But you should be very clear that this is what the car can give you and this is what it can't give you. It will not dispense you a Coke. Right. But it will drive you from point A to point B. So I wrote that book. But almost as soon as I wrote it, I was deeply, deeply dissatisfied because I was young. I was trying to impress people. Look, books aren't about impressing people. They're about communicating.
Right.
The best communication is the best book. And if you're just trying to aggrandize yourself and show, how great you are because you know this and you know that, that's just a hoarding on the street. And my book was pompous and self-important and obtuse, and it used extremely, big words. It was projecting me as an intellectual. Okay, and I sold it to a textbook group, Macmillan. They sold it out, no problem. But I hated the book. It had great ideas done badly. So I said, I'm sorry, I don't want to allow a reprint. They were saying, what's your problem? It'll be bought everywhere, libraries and so forth. No, I said, no. It isn't about making another lousy buck. I'm sorry. It's about me actually sharing with the community. And then there was no time because, then your law practice takes off. And right. You need somebody to have a pandemic so that you can write the book again. And then there are other books to write. There's so much to say on every subject under the sun, and generally speaking, lawyers are generally speaking. So, I didn't know what to speak first. So in the pandemic, then I rewrote the book. I've written it in a more racy style, more accessible. It's the same principles. The principle is very simple. You first have to decide if you want to fight a legal war. And there are only 5 rules to make that decision. And if you've decided that you are going to fight a legal war because based on those 5 rules, you meet the qualifying criteria, then you have 5 preparations to make. So that you are positioned in a way where you're actually able to fight a war. So there are 5 rules, litigation preparations, and then you get into your fight and you need both strategy and tactics. And there are 7 strategies it really comes down to, the 7 things you can do to win. And once the war starts, on the tactical side, there are 7 tactics. If you do all these things, the chances of you losing are very low. You can lose, okay, if you have a rubbish case, you're going to lose. Right. But you can still play the game in a way where you come out ahead. You can force a compromise, you can stalemate the whole situation, and then there's a lot of commercial stuff. But my perspective was never from the viewpoint of the lawyer, because that's just legal rules. It was a book for business. That if you're a businessman and you want to get into the innards of the justice machine, and I call it the justice machine because there's more to it than the law, then you must understand how this justice machine functions. And if you play it the right way, you will get your objectives. And finally, that book has been rewritten. But here's the twist: I refuse to sell it now. I don't need the money. It's amazing how people chase money. But in the end, if you look at it, the amount of money you're capable of spending in your lifetime is very limited. And when you get past your 60s, you can't even digest chicken anymore. Forget about, really, having money. I stay at these places and there's all this exotic seafood, and I've always loved my shellfish, And today I can order crabs or lobsters without thinking about it. I can't digest it anymore. So what will I do with money? And I thought I'll just give it back to the community. So we're going to do a download. It's going to be free. I hope you don't think the book is the less because I'm not going to take money off your back for it.
Right.
Just download it, read it. If you don't like it, trash it. Heaven knows you trash enough without,
I, for one, am sure I'm going to print out a copy and I'm going to be handing it over to. I'd like to kind of promote it as much as possible, but I'll hand it over to the juniors, but with the hope that they will not perhaps take those lessons and surpass me. So I'll try to imbibe them myself to the best possible extent. Of course, I kid. I understand that there is much more to it than just putting in the learning the skills. You have to put in the work. There is so much more to it. There is grit, everything else. And of course, those are lessons that we learn in these two books of yours, especially Legal Confidential. So I must confess, I can connect to a lot of aspects. The struggles of starting out with your practice of law is something that I didn't really have to struggle with much with, because I'm a third generation lawyer. So I had a lot of privilege on that aspect. But when you talk about the struggles of dealing with the judges, dealing with the clients, dealing with other people in your organization, that was something that I could resonate with on several levels, and that was very, very it inspired as well, that at least one person is able to verbalize, put in words your struggles as well. He understands your pain. Otherwise, if you talk to somebody else, they don't understand what kind of struggles, what kind of pain and suffering you have to go through as a young litigation lawyer. I do have a few more questions, sir.
Yeah, please do.
You never sat for the judicial exam and seem to have no interest in becoming a judge. Why not?
Short answer, I'm not judge material. What does a judge do? Firstly, what kind of person becomes a judge and be any good at it? Not somebody who's trying to find a sinecure, yeah? It's a person who is firstly extremely rational, extremely calm, extremely balanced. Ideally, you should not be too smart. Smart people make fools of themselves.
Right.
Commonsensical is what you need. If you think about the judgment, it was only H.R. Khanna, who said that from a purely commonsensical viewpoint, I don't understand this business that Indira Gandhi is talking about.
Right.
And he stood alone. And if you look at him, he didn't have a brilliant mind or a very great career from that viewpoint, but he was commonsensical, and to my mind, one of the very great judges. For that reason alone, I've seen other brilliant judges who just go daft. Simply because you can be too smart for your own good.
Right.
Okay, don't get me wrong. Yeah, it's nice to be smart. I think there was a time when I was younger, I was really smart. So if you're a balanced personality and who doesn't get caught up in the heat of the moment and the nonsense that lawyers will throw at you. Lawyers are paid to throw stuff at you. What kind of person is able to absorb it, laugh it off and say, no, I'm not believing any of this. Let's talk basics. That person should become a judge. I am not that person. I love to come down on the other side of the argument. I love to control my own destiny. I don't want to be, somebody doesn't decide for me what chair I sit on and for how many hours a day and how many Sundays I spend dictating judgments to a stenographer who is a sinecure and a bureaucrat, and he doesn't have any interest in his job. He's only doing it to hold on to his job. So I'm trying to get him to work and he's doing a shoddy job, and then I'm having to correct it again and again. No, you know what I'm saying. That life didn't appeal to me. Now I could take the cynical view and I could say, yeah, but you'll get a bungalow in Lutyens, Delhi. You'll have a nice car. Nah, it's not interesting. Anybody can have a nice car. And cars and houses are the easiest things to get. If you're good at what you do, these are not the issues of life.
Right,
Yeah.
sir. Right, sir. What kind of a person is best suited to write a judicial exam and choose to become a judge? Of course, you've talked about shouldn't be too smart for your own good. But apart from that, what should a say a law student or a young entrant to the bar consider before he tries to transition to the bench?
I must resist the urge to be preachy, but I would like to think that it would be great if the people who write the exam are not looking for a stable job, but care about being a judge and what the true satisfaction of being a judge. One of my dear friends, he passed away of COVID, and you read it in the papers in May. He was a Lokpal, very dear friend of mine. He loved being a judge. He went in there and he decided 10 cases in favor of the underdog or the person who was right, and he'd come home and he'd have this grin on his face because he thought it mattered. He said, look, you can get paid in any job.
Right.
But to be able to do this, only a judge can do this, to really do good in the world. I wish more people would write an exam who cared about that.
Right.
But will that happen? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
How did law practice change you as a person? And what should a young person worry about in entering a profession as difficult as law?
How did law change me as a person? I started to live in the existential void, but that doesn't answer anything. It made me understand the nature of the world better. I became less judgmental. I became less moralistic. I became more pragmatic. I saw people within the context of the dark side, and the law is a very dark side. You almost never see people at their PR best.
Right.
You see them at their ugliest. They're talking about what they're going to do to their daddies and their sisters and their brothers. And you can become very cynical, and you have to be afraid of becoming cynical, because sometimes you start out fearing the monsters and then you become that monster. That's the problem with being a lawyer. How do you keep your equilibrium, your essential ethical framework in a world which is so dark? And I think I've struggled with this a lot, sitting on the edge of darkness. And wherever there's a profit motive, there are days when you say, I think I'm going to tip over, maybe become a Hawala agent or something. You've seen some of that happening to lawyers.
Sure.
I actually sympathize with those people. People sit and laugh, He had a nice practice. Why did he have to become a Hawala agent? It's so easy to take that one step too far and compromise yourself morally. So that's the biggest risk, that you may yourself enter the ethical void.
And that's where you set yourself boundaries.
Yeah.
And you don't worry about the morality.
Yeah. So I try not to judge anyone else. I try not to judge other people's compulsions or their limitations or their vulnerabilities as human beings, but at the same time I clearly set my own boundaries and I stay within them, knowing that this is the only place where I'll be comfortable and be able to live with myself. Yeah.
And one final question was, sir, you've talked about how you wouldn't change a thing if you had to start over all over again. But say, if you had to do something else with your life, as when you started out with your career, what else could you have gone for?
I could have done elements of what I've actually done. I mean, I could have been a full-time writer, but that would be more of the same. I could have been a professional photographer. That would be more of the same. I couldn't have been any other person. This is who I am, and I found the profession that resonated with it, which is why I hung in there for 42 years.
42 years.
So I couldn't have been anybody else. So I couldn't have done anything different. I would have made the same mistakes, because ultimately it isn't about the mistakes you may make. It's a person you are. If you are a certain person, you will make a certain kind of mistake.
Right.
You can keep telling yourself, I'm smarter than that. No, you're not. We are all... This is the whole point of the Mahabharata, isn't it? Even though, and I'm giving one of 1,000 examples, even though Duryodhan knew that the end... Well, why Duryodhan? Why not his daddy? He knew that the path his son was treading was wrong, but he was powerless to stop it because he was bound to the state.
Right.
Everybody out there in that book, it's such a tragic book, because everybody there is a prisoner of his compulsions and must act in a certain way. We are all like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Sir, This has been an absolute pleasure. I am dying for Winning Legal Wars to come out. But more than that, I'm very, very grateful. And I'm the most grateful for the fact that through this interview, a lot of people, when I tell them, when they ask me, read this book, and I tell them, read this book, I'll now be able to send them the recording of this video and tell them, read this book and this is why. And you've just gotten a little glimpse into what Ranjeev Dubey is, and of course the privilege to meet you in person, to have your candid, as always candid self out on the forefront in front of a video camera is a big privilege for me, sir.
No,
Thank you so much for doing this, sir. This was incredible, sir.
Lovely talking to you. Thank you for coming by. It was fun.
Thank
Yeah.
you, sir.